Montana Territory, June 1881. The church doors slammed behind her like the crack of a gunshot, and for a long moment, the only sound was the wind tugging at her veil. Naomi Gracefield stood alone on the wooden steps, her wedding dress whipping around her ankles, her hands shaking as petals scattered across the dusty street like broken promises. He had walked out, not quietly, not kindly. He had looked her up and down in front of the preacher, the guests, her father, and said, "I cannot marry someone who looks like that." And then he left. The crowd had gasped. Her father had turned red and whispered something too low for her to hear. The preacher had tried to salvage the moment, but Naomi had not moved. Just stood there, heart thudding in her chest, feeling each word like a slap. She had always known she was not the kind of beauty men chased. Her hips were wide, her skin darker than most expected. Her mother had been Muscogee Creek, though Naomi barely remembered her, and her eyes were set deep, too intense. But she had thought he had loved her anyway. She had been wrong. She had never felt smaller in her life. The guests began trickling away, some with pity in their eyes, others with relief they would have something to gossip about for weeks. Naomi stood there until the last wagon rolled off and the church fell quiet, the sun climbing higher and hotter until her feet ached in her white shoes. She stepped off the plank steps and walked. She did not know where she was going, but she could not stay. 3 miles out of town, the sun already baking her shoulders, Naomi heard hooves. She turned, squinting into the light. A man on horseback was coming up the trail, tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low, dust rising around him. She almost stepped off the road, but he slowed as he approached. "You all right, miss?" She said nothing. He took in the white dress, the undone veil, the flowers tangled in her hair. His brows drew together, not with judgment, but something else. Concern, maybe, or gentleness. Did something happen? Naomi swallowed hard. "I was supposed to get married today." He nodded once, like that made sense. "I take it he has no interest in being shot?" the cowboy asked, his voice dry. That pulled a sound from her throat, something between a laugh and a bitter cough. "He said I was too much to look at, too dark, too wide, too much." The man dismounted. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his late 20s, with sun-worn skin and a strong, quiet way about him. He held his horse's reins and looked her over once, head to toe, slow and thoughtful. "I see everything I want," he said simply. Naomi blinked. "What?" "I said I see everything I want." He said it like it was a fact, like it was the weather or the time of day. She stared at him. "You do not even know me," he shrugged. "We can fix that." She looked down at the dusty train of her dress. "You must be joking." "I am not." He held out his hand. "My name is August Callen. I came into town for supplies, thought I would head back to the ranch by nightfall." "You look like you could use a place to sit, something to eat, maybe a new dress." Naomi hesitated. She had nowhere else to go, and something in his voice, calm, steady, unflinching, made her want to believe him. "Naomi Gracefield," she said quietly and put her hand in his. August's ranch was tucked between 2 ridgelines, a place so quiet you could hear the wind move through the grass. He had a small cabin, a corral, a lean-to for tools. He did not talk much, but he made a pot of coffee and handed her a clean shirt to change into while her dress dried on the fence. They sat on the porch while the light faded. "You live out here alone?" she asked. "I do." "No wife, no family," he shook his head. "Parents passed, no siblings. I got some cattle, a few horses. That is enough for me." Naomi pulled her knees up under the borrowed shirt. "I worked in my father's store, helped with books and customers. My mother died when I was small. I do not know what I am now. I thought I would be married, thought I would have a house of my own." August turned to look at her. "You still can." She stared at him. "You do not even know me." "I know you got grit. I know you walked away from something that broke you. I know you came here and did not cry once, even though you had every reason to. That tells me enough." Her throat tightened. "You do not think I am too much?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I think you are exactly enough." Naomi stayed the night, then another. She slept in the small spare room, but each morning she helped him feed the animals, fix the fence, mend the leaking roof. She was good with her hands, smart, quick to laugh when the silence stretched too long. By the fifth day, he caught her watching him while he worked the corral. He walked over slow, giving her time to turn away. She did not. "I meant it," he said. "What? That I see everything I want," her heart thudded. "I do not need fixing," she said. "I do not want to fix you. I am not someone you can just rescue and keep. I am not trying to." She stepped closer. "Then what are you doing?" "I am falling in love with you," he said. It was not loud, not dramatic, but it was the most real thing she had ever heard. She looked up at him, and for the first time in days she let herself believe it. "You mean that?" "I do." She reached up and touched his jaw, rough with stubble, warm from the sun. "Then stay with me," he nodded. "Always." The sky had turned lavender over the ridge, and Naomi's hands were stained green from shelling peas out behind the cabin. August had been fixing a broken latch on the barn door most of the afternoon, and though they'd spoken little, the quiet between them had begun to feel companionable, not empty. She rose and brushed her skirts, walking barefoot across the packed dirt toward him. "You always work this late?" she asked, resting a hip against the fence post. August glanced up from the hinge, steel rasp in one hand. "Only when something won't hold right unless I do." Naomi watched him test the swing of the door. "That how you are with people too?" He gave the door one last tug and stood back. "People ain't so simple. Most don't want fixing, just want to be seen plain." She tilted her head. "And what do you see when you look at me now?" He considered her a moment, expression unreadable. "A woman who doesn't flinch from work, who's still standing after being knocked flat, and who doesn't scare easy." "Maybe I'm just too tired to run," she said, not quite smiling. "I don't think that's it." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of sagebrush and old grass. Naomi breathed it in, her arms folded loosely. The light caught on a silver button at his collar, and she found herself watching the way he stood solid, patient, not one to fill silence just to quiet it. "I never had a man look at me without measuring," she said after a while. "Not without deciding what I was worth before I opened my mouth." August didn't answer right away. He reached for the rasp and tucked it back into his tool bag. "My mother used to say a person's true shape shows when they're still," he said. "When there's nothing to impress, nothing to hide behind. I watch how folks are when they think no one's looking." Naomi looked down at her bare feet, the dirt warm beneath her toes. "And what about you? What's your shape when no one's looking?" He leaned back against the barn wall, arms crossed. "I don't talk much. I keep a clean table. I let the horses eat first. I don't lie and I don't hit. That's the shape." She nodded, something soft catching at her ribs. "I saw a book in your room," he added. "Ledger with numbers. You keep accounts?" "I did for my father's store," she said. He'd take credit from folks he trusted, but it was my job to remember who owed what and when it came due. "Think you'd mind keeping track of a ranch instead?" Naomi blinked. "You mean yours?" he shrugged. "It's ours if you stay." She didn't answer at once. Her heart had started beating too fast to trust her voice. She turned instead, walking back toward the house, but stopped at the porch step. "I'll need paper and ink," she said, without turning around. "You'll have it. And a table that doesn't wobble. I'll fix the leg." She finally looked back, "And no one calling me too much." August stepped forward slow until they were just a breath apart. "No one here's calling you anything but mine." She didn't lean in. She didn't need to. The way his eyes held hers was enough to settle something inside her that had never quite been still. That night, she cooked beans with salt pork and baked cornbread in the cast iron. August brought in water from the pump and stood beside her as she stirred, neither of them speaking. Before bed, he knocked lightly on her doorframe. "I'll be riding to Lewistown tomorrow," he said. "Need fence wire and salt blocks. Could use another set of eyes on the supply list." She turned down the quilt and picked up the list he'd left on the side table. "I'll mark what's missing." August nodded and lingered just a moment longer. "You sleep all right here?" he asked. She looked at him, then down at the bed. "I do." He gave one small nod, then turned away. "August," he paused at the door, "I'll be here when you get back." He didn't smile. But something in his face changed, a quiet brightness that didn't need light to be seen. "Good," he said, and shut the door gently behind him. Naomi waited on the porch long after August had disappeared down the ridge road, the wide brim of his hat the last thing the morning light swallowed. She wasn't used to the quiet of waiting for someone to return. Before, she'd always been the one left behind with no promise of return, just the hollow silence of folks deciding she wasn't worth the rest of the walk. Now she had a promise. And a place where her name hadn't turned to ash in someone else's mouth. Inside, the cabin held the scent of breakfast cornmeal mush and boiled chicory. She'd washed the dishes, aired the linens, swept the corners where wind liked to gather dust. On the table sat the account ledgers she'd organized the night before, each marked with a strip of cloth torn from the dress she no longer cared to keep. She pressed her thumb into one of the bindings and traced a column of numbers she'd corrected. August's handwriting was clean but uneven, like he never learned to write for the sake of beauty, only for need. She'd never ask him about it. Some things a man offers in his own time. By early afternoon, a wagon creaked up the path. Naomi stepped outside, wiping her hands on her skirt, heart lifting instinctively, then pausing. It wasn't August. A man sat the bench seat, reins in hand, a battered hat tipped back and a rifle slung beside him. His beard was shot through with gray, and his eyes held the same dust-washed glare as the hills behind him. "You the woman staying up here with August Callen?" he asked. Naomi nodded, wary. "Who wants to know?" "Name's Emery Pike. I run cattle east of the river. August and I trade horses come spring." She didn't move from the porch. He shifted in his seat, squinting. "Didn't mean to startle you, just thought I'd stop and say I heard about what happened in town. My sister keeps a dry goods store. Word travels fast." Naomi's jaw tightened. "I've no use for gossip." "Didn't bring any," he said. "Just thought you might want to know August's not the sort to do something halfway. If he brought you here, it means something." She stepped down onto the dirt, her arms loose at her sides. "I can speak for myself." "That you can," Emery said, tipping his hat. "I'll be on my way." As his wagon rolled on, Naomi stood still, the wind tugging at her sleeves. That a stranger had come to tell her who August was, it didn't scare her. But it reminded her how many eyes had been on her back since that morning at the church, and how far out here still wasn't far enough to escape a man's poor choice. She didn't go back inside. Instead, she walked the fence line, checking knots in the wire, testing the tension with her bare hand. The cattle were grazing on the southern slope, heads low, tails flicking. She counted them 26, then checked the water trough, filled from the stream August had diverted years ago. By the time the sun had started to slope west, hoofbeats came again. This time, she didn't wait. She met him halfway down the trail, her boots stirring dust, her braids sliding down her back from where it had come loose. "I heard from a man named Emery," she said before he'd even dismounted. August grunted as he tied off the reins. "He always did like hearing himself speak. Said you trade horses. Sometimes. Said you don't do things halfway." August paused, then looked at her fully. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I'm still here." He handed down a sack of flour and another of beans, then unlatched a basket lined with cloth. Inside were 2 folded dresses, one russet, the other pale green. "I didn't know what color you'd want," he said. She reached in, fingers brushing cotton. "You bought these for me. I figure a woman ought to have something she picked for herself, but I wanted to give you the choice." Naomi looked up at him. "I haven't worn green since I was 15. Then maybe it's time to again." She took the green one in both hands. "You sure about this?" "About me? I've never been more certain." Evening laid itself quietly over the ridge as they walked back together, the sound of their steps soft on the dirt. Inside, she hung the dress on the peg beside the door, careful with the shape of it. August unpacked the rest of the goods without needing to speak. The stove warmed the room by degrees. Later, when the cabin had gone still and the sky outside turned to velvet, Naomi stood by the window, arms folded. "I want to learn the land," she said. "More than the books." I want to know which grass grows back first after snow and which post the cattle favor come dusk. August was at the table oiling his saddle straps. You will. I want a life that's mine, not one someone handed me because they felt sorry. He didn't look up. Then you'll have it. She turned from the window. I won't ask you to carry me. I never planned to, he said. I want you walking beside me. She sat across from him, her hands resting on the worn wood. Then we start tomorrow. His eyes lifted to meet hers, and the quiet between them deepened, not empty, but full of something strong and steady. Tomorrow, then. The following morning broke cool and gray, clouds hanging low against the hills like a kettle left simmering. Naomi pulled on one of August's old flannel shirts and tied her hair in a knot at the base of her neck. The green dress hung untouched by the door. She stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee, steam curling past her face, and saw August already saddling the bay mare. He didn't call to her, he never did, but he looked up once, long enough to let her know she was expected. They rode west, past the slope where the cattle bedded, and into a stretch of land that hadn't been worked in years. Naomi kept her horse steady beside his, one hand on the horn, the other loose at her thigh. Wild chokecherry bushes tangled the fence line here, and the posts leaned like old men. August rode without speaking, but his eyes moved, constantly watching the ground, the sky, the way the mare's ears twitched. Naomi finally asked, "How far does it go?" "All the way to the river bend," he said. "Land was my father's. He let it go fallow after the flood. Never put it back to work." "Why not?" August slowed his horse. "Lost too much. Crops, tools, a mule. After that, he stuck to cattle." She dismounted and crouched near the fence, fingers brushing the brittle stalks of old alfalfa. "The soil's still good," he nodded. "I know. You think it could grow again, with the right hands on it." She stood and looked at him. "I want it." August tilted his head slightly. "You do?" "I want to plant something that's mine, not just keep track of someone else's stock. I want a garden and maybe a row of corn. Something with color." He dismounted and came to stand beside her. "Then we'll clear the brush, put up new posts, dig proper furrows." Naomi folded her arms. "You'll help me, I'll follow your lead." They walked the boundary on foot, boots crunching over dry roots and stones. Naomi knelt to inspect the soil at intervals, breaking earth between her fingers. "I'll need seed," she said. "Tools, a spade with a good edge." August adjusted his hat. "There's a man in Utica sells heirloom seed, keeps them wrapped in wax paper. I'll ride that way next week." They paused beneath a cottonwood where the air smelled of damp bark and last year's leaves. Naomi leaned against the trunk and looked toward the distant hills. "Did you ever want children?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I did once. But I didn't know what kind of man I'd become. Thought it wouldn't be fair to bring someone into a life I hadn't figured out yet." She studied him. "And now, I know what kind of man I am," he said. Naomi bent to pick up a stone and turned it in her palm. "I wouldn't want them raised in town. Not where folks teach you to measure yourself by your skin and your waist. They'd grow up here," August said, "with the land to teach them." She let the stone fall. "Then maybe." They walked back in the low light of late afternoon, shadows stretching long over the grass. Near the corral, Naomi paused. "I want to build a lean-to for the tools," she said, "and a place to dry herbs. I've got memories of my mother stringing them up by color green to brown to gold. You remember what they were for? Some. Feverroot, sweet balm, wild mint." "I'll have to learn again." August stepped close enough to tuck a curl behind her ear. "I'll build whatever you need." Inside, Naomi brought out the ledger and opened a fresh page. She dipped her pen and began to list what they'd need: wood for posts, lengths of wire, a new bucket. August sat across from her, watching the ink soak into the paper. After a while, she looked up. "I want to be a woman who makes something grow." "You already are," he said. "No," she said softly. "Before now, I only survived what others gave me. I want to choose." August reached across the table, his hand rough and warm over hers. "Then choose this," he said. "Not just the land, me." Naomi didn't blink. "I already did." The first frost came early that year, crisping the edges of the cottonwood leaves before they had time to turn gold. Naomi woke to see her breath in the cabin and tugged the quilt higher until she remembered the fire had burned low. August was already up, feeding the stove and setting kindling with the quiet concentration he always gave to small tasks. He glanced back when she stepped down from the loft. "You'll want your shawl," he said. "Ground's white out there." She wrapped herself in the wool one he'd traded for in Utica, a deep ochre weave that reminded her of autumns from long ago, before her world had narrowed to ledger columns and polite smiles. They ate oat cakes and smoked ham standing by the fire, sharing a single tin plate between them. August poured her coffee, then his, and didn't speak until the wind rattled the shutters. "That back field's ready to turn," he said. Naomi nodded. "I was thinking we could try rye." "It'll hold through the cold." August leaned his shoulder against the wall, mug cupped between his hands. "You sure you want to work the plow yourself?" "I want the feel of it in my hands," she said. "I want to know what the land answers to." He studied her a moment, then reached for his coat. "Mitch Halper's got the right blades. We'll ride out before the snow settles." The ride to Halper's homestead took most of the morning. Naomi rode ahead sometimes, her braid tucked beneath a scarf, eyes scanning the sky. August kept half a horse's length behind, content to let her lead. Mitch was cutting wood when they arrived, his twin boys hauling kindling behind him. He laughed when he saw Naomi take the reins. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Didn't expect to see you out here, Miss Gracefield." Naomi dismounted and squared her shoulders. "I'm here for a purpose, not a visit." August stepped beside her without a word. They left with the plow and a promise of seed come spring. Naomi rode back with the blade bundled across the mule cart, her gloves stained from helping load it. She didn't speak much, but August saw the way her eyes lingered on the horizon, as if something inside her was finally beginning to settle. That evening they cleared a space near the southern edge of the cabin, where the wind broke against a low rise and the soil turned dark. August dug the first trench, but Naomi took the second, steady and sure, her shoulders squared against the weight. They worked until the moon rose silver over the ridge. When they laid their tools aside, she leaned against the porch rail, dirt beneath her nails and a satisfied ache in her arms. "You reckon we'll get it all in before freeze?" she asked. "We will," August said. "We've got more hands between us now." She looked at him, then stepped forward and placed her palm against his chest, just above his heart. "I never thought I'd have this." He covered her hand with his. "I didn't either, but I know what it is now." "Tell me," she said. "It's peace," he said, voice low. "It's knowing you'll be here come morning, that what we build stays built." She leaned up and kissed him slow, certain, like she was marking the moment. He held her without urgency, the kind of hold that says, "I'm not going anywhere." Snow came 2 weeks later. Naomi moved through the cabin like she'd always belonged, tending the stove, steeping bark for coughs, sewing a hem by lamplight while August mended tack by the hearth. They didn't speak often in the evenings, but their silence was full. When she laughed, it was with her whole body. When he touched her, it was without fear. One night, with the wind howling outside, Naomi looked up from her quilting. "I want to marry you." August looked up from the harness strap he'd been oiling. "I thought we already were," she smiled. "Not by law, not by paper, but I want to stand up beside you and say it plain." He nodded once. "Then we'll ride into Lewistown come thaw." The day the ice broke on the creek, they rode in together. She wore the green dress he'd given her, pressed and let out at the seams. He wore the same shirt he'd worn the day they met, mended at the shoulder. The preacher was an old man with cloudy eyes and a steady voice. They said their vows with hands clasped and eyes steady. Afterward, they didn't go to a saloon or a supper hall. They rode home. Naomi stepped down from her horse and looked at the land she'd chosen. The fence lines were straight. The barn stood whole. The field behind the cabin held the first tight shoots of rye. August came to stand beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You happy?" he asked. She didn't answer at once, just looked out at the place they'd made. "I'm not just happy," she said. I'm whole." He took her hand and they walked inside together. The years that followed were quiet but never dull. Naomi's garden grew wide and green come spring, and her herbs hung in neat rows from the rafters. August built her a table with wide boards and smooth edges, and she kept the accounts with a careful hand. They traded with neighbors, hosted meals, and added a second room when the cabin started to feel too small for all they wanted to hold. Their first child came in a summer storm, a strong girl with August's eyes and Naomi's quiet stare. Two more followed, a boy who sang to the cows and a daughter who refused to wear shoes. Naomi taught them to read ledger lines and how to tell the wind's direction by the way grass bent. August taught them to ride with their knees and to never speak unless they meant it. Naomi never returned to the town where she'd been left standing in white. She didn't need to. She had built her name elsewhere, in the calloused grip of a plow, in the warm press of her husband's hand, in the dark earth that gave back what she sowed. And each morning when the sun rose over the ridge, August would rise first, light the stove, and pour 2 cups of coffee, one for the woman who had walked toward him when she could have turned away, and one for the life they had built, quiet and certain, side by side.